Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Rory. This is Reggie. This is for you. I just wanted you
He's
to
the
meet him.
cutest. He's so huge.
He's 11 weeks.
Yeah, Sharon, I think he's getting bigger since I just saw him maybe what, two
I
days
know.
ago? Yeah, I swear, like he's
Our heads are the same size.
How's his bitey stuff?
Oh my gosh. Can you come out here, please, and stay with him? My hands are a mess.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
He's beautiful.
thank you. He's silly and he's funny and he bites a lot. Yeah. And he's a pee body. So he loves to pee. And my husband and I are still getting his rhythm of when he's empty. Like I thought he was empty. No, he's not. Okay. Okay. It's time for you to lay down. I know.
Rory,
Right.
this
Bye.
is your day, right? Like I got
Yep.
my days right. Okay.
Yep. All right.
Yes. I know it's confusing. How are you, Jyoti?
Good. Good. I have a talk that I'm prepping for this evening, which originally was supposed to have 10 people and now it's in like the hundreds. And so that'll be interesting.
Wow.
But you can pretend like you're talking to the 10, right?
Well, that's exactly it. It's always fun when it shifts from 10 to a couple hundred overnight.
Yeah.
Wild. That's a lot of people. What is
You'll
it
be
about?
great. You'll be great.
Social justice and shelter medicine.
Oh, okay. That's tonight.
That is tonight. And it was supposed to be for 10 vet students who asked us to talk to them.
Got it.
Now it's a lot more.
I want to write that down.
Okay, that just means I added one more to my list.
101. I don't know where my sticky notes went. Still letting people in. Okay. All right. People are still joining us, which is awesome. Thank you for being here today. Give people like a minute, another minute, then I'll get started. So nice to see so many people here. Thanks for being here. Give people like another minute or so, and then we'll get moving. Oh, thanks, Bobby. Just saw that you said you were gonna watch the door for me. Thanks. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and get started because I have some slides and I'm not gonna spend too much time on slides today, but I do have some slides, so apologies. And I want to say that this is the first time that I've presented this information for an animal welfare audience. So thank you for being here. And some of this might be new for you, and some of this might be sort of 101 basic for others of you. So just wanting to kind of meet us all where we're at. I never understand how to present on Zoom. Okay, can you see my screen? Yet?
Yes.
Maybe? Okay.
Yeah, we can see the speaker notes and the slide is relatively small.
You can see speaker notes.
Yeah.
You just have to hit present.
Yeah, present.
Okay, I see. I have it on 2 screens. What? See
Yes.
my
Perfect.
screen, but no notes. Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for being here. Like I said, this is my first time presenting this to an animal welfare audience, so I will love any feedback and just questions that you have. Today, we're going to talk about trans inclusive workplaces and how to build a culture of belonging in animal welfare. I always like to start presentations just with like a shout out to somebody. This is a quote by Sylvia Rivera, who is a Puerto Rican person. She identified in a lot of different ways throughout her lifetime, but was a trans and gay activist who really helped sort of shine light on homelessness being a huge issue for trans people. She was homeless herself at age 11 due to being kicked out of her home and displaced, and started a lot of different organizations and movements throughout her lifetime, really to just help trans people, drag queens, and gay youth that were experiencing homelessness. So I've been in the national animal welfare world for about 6 years, but I've only recently, very, very recently, talked with people that are not my close friends in this movement about being a transgender person. I imagine that's probably pretty similar for a lot of people's experience in animal welfare. I remember the first time that I outed myself in a call, it wasn't that long ago. It was, Haas had already started, so it really wasn't that long ago, but it's really thanks to coworkers like Claire and Bobby who are on this call, and leaders like Dr. Sagerson, Dr. Jefferson, Sharon Fletcher, who's on this call, have really made me feel safe to talk about these conversations. So thank you, and thanks to everyone who makes spaces like this safe for us. So just talking about my identity a little bit, while I'm a trans person and I'm super open to talking about this stuff, I do like to say that I'm one person. I do not represent all trans people. And I also want to acknowledge that not everybody who is a trans person, gender non-binary, queer, otherwise marginalized, might not want to talk about their identity. I have my own unique experiences. That being said, I'm really excited about having these conversations. I welcome curiosity, questions, conversations. And I also want to just put into context a little bit that, yes, I'm a trans person. I identify as genderqueer, masculine of center. We can unpack all of this today, later. I also like to occupy sort of a middle space, androgynous space. And beyond my lived experiences of being a trans person, I've also been a community organizer, taught consent-based programming, gender inclusivity training to college students, to different organizations, and have a degree in literature and gender studies. Again, that's not going to be everybody's experience as a trans person. Some of us are better equipped to talk about this stuff than others in terms of like bigger picture conversations. And of course, all of us should talk about our own lived experiences as well. To put into context too, I've worked in animal welfare for over 15 years. This has really been the place that I felt like I belong more than any other work that I've done in the world. Animals really are my connection to all things, and hoping that through the work that we do, we can really break down binaries that we've created between animals, nature, humans, and really start uniting people and animals. So believe that companion animal welfare is a entryway to get us there. And this is a photo of me when I was younger, with my chicken Audrey, taken by an artist friend of mine. This picture is like enormous and was in this gallery and actually sold to this old rich lesbian in San Francisco and is in their living room now. I do not know this person. So I always like to think about this giant photo of myself as a young trans person in someone's living room. All right, so why does trans inclusivity matter to animal welfare? I think that this is a question that I'm still trying to unpack myself, but the easiest way that I can sort of talk about this is that it matters because it matters for staff, for volunteers, for clients, for animal lives. And when people thrive, organizations thrive. So when our people are thriving, we're going to be able to do more impactful work. And I also think that it matters to know some statistics. So 30% of transgender employees, and I can give all of the stats that I'm quoting here in a handout, but 30% of transgender employees report having been fired, denied a promotion, or experiencing another form of mistreatment in the workplace due to their gender identity or expression. So let's start by changing this in animal welfare. 30% of people is too many. So our goals for today, I want to break down just what gender means, define trans, give you all some just basic 101 gender theory stuff. And then we can talk about ideas for more trans inclusivity in animal welfare organizations. I want to talk a little bit about just being mindful. What do you do if you mispronounce somebody? How can we do better? Go through some commonly asked questions that I get, and then just kind of brainstorm what's next. And this is Radcliffe Hall, born in 1880, also identified as a trans person, poet, author, actually not trans, invert then, because we didn't have that terminology. But I just like to put into context that this is not a new thing. The trans people have been on this planet for a long time, and what a handsome gent. All right, so some of my experiences at work, I like to put this in context, and I'm gonna be vulnerable with you all for a second, and this is not a call out for anybody on this call. So I just wanna say that, like, I will talk to you if you upset me. But I've been mispronounced by colleagues, by leadership in animal welfare many, many times, even by people who didn't know me by any other pronouns other than he, him. So I've been asked to identify my legal name on various occasions in different positions for reasons that didn't really seem clear. I've never worked anywhere except for maybe my last couple of jobs where someone didn't ask me if I've seen Boys Don't Cry. I've also had people ask me where I am in my transition, what my body is like, and lots of just really super personal information that I feel is just, it's very particular to trans people that people feel like you can just ask these super personal questions. So I just want to sort of put this into context that the things that some of us are dealing with sort of on a daily basis, from being mispronounced, it's tiring, and just recognizing that. And every time I talk about this, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people, being vulnerable is hard. I always worry that people are going to scrutinize my work more. And most of us have probably experienced some sort of violence outside of work, lost community to violence, have community who have experienced homelessness, or ourselves have experienced homelessness. Just trying to put all of this into some context for where we are. All right, so gender theory 101. And I imagine that this might be a bit more theoretical than some of the presentations that you've seen about gender, but I'm just doing it my way. There might be some things that you see here that are a little different than other places that you've learned about transgender identity. So first, just starting with some of the basics. Today, we're not talking about sexuality, we're talking about gender. Sexuality and gender are intrinsically linked in some ways, but they are not the same. So sexuality refers to someone's sexual preference, gender refers to gender identity, gender expression. And that's fairly simple, but important. Okay, so you may have heard this term cisgender. This term popped up 15 years ago or so. It's a newer term, even within sort of the queer community, but it's super useful to avoid language like normal, biological. Gives non-trans people a way to talk about their identity. It is also an adjective like transgender. So Bill is a cisgender man is how this would be used in a sentence. And it refers to people with a gender assigned at birth that's congruent with their gender identity and gender expression. So get rid of saying normal gender or bio man or bio woman and just, you can say cisgender. I also really like when people say non-trans because centering marginalized identities is awesome and always welcome in my book. So what does trans mean? Trans means that your gender identity is different from your gender assigned at birth. You'll see trans with the little asterisk, and it's because we want to get, for some of us, and this is also like conversations within queer community and all of this, you'll see trans asterisk, and that's really meant to be inclusive of people that might not identify as transgender, but they might identify as non-binary or gender non-conforming or gender fluid or two-spirit. So the trans asterisk is really just like trans plus. So I really like it. And a book just came out about it if you're interested, by Jack Halberstam, who's one of the leading sort of trans theorists in the world. So what does queer mean? This used to be a derogatory term. I really love this quote by Oscar Wilde because, you know, ahead of his time, this was a term that was coined in the 90s. And also want to say not all trans people identify as queer. I identify as queer. I really like the word. It's been used both as sort of like an umbrella term for sexuality and gender. I really use it in this sort of like more radical way, which is really to just resist normalizing any identities and thinking about fringe identity. So it's really like a resistance to the idea of normalizing identities and of assimilation. And this is Audre Lorde, hero of heroes. Important when we're talking about this to just like understand what intersectionality is. So that term was coined by someone, Kimberly Crenshaw, but Audre Lorde really popularizes this idea and thinks about sort of the interconnectivity, the intersectionality between race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, religion, spirituality, faith, and how do all of the different parts of our identity interact to form who we are. What I really love about this, especially like thinking about this with queerness in mind, is that it allows us to think about how we really can't talk about our identities in a vacuum, right? Like we have to always give story, give context to who we are. And who we are might sort of change in place and space. The way I talk about my trans identity in a room with mostly non-trans people might be a little bit different than how I talk about that in a room full of all trans people, if that makes sense. So I love this quote and this photo. And if you've not read Audre Lorde, you ought to. Okay, so I don't want to stare at slides this whole time. I also want to go through some commonly asked questions that I get, and then we can sort of like move through some of the ideas that I have that I'm going to bring to you all today. So what do you know? What do you do if you don't know if someone's trans or you think someone is trans? And I think that we have to just stop asking ourselves this question. I think probably like I walk through the world just sort of assuming that everyone is trans, but that just makes my life more enjoyable, maybe. I don't know. But maybe what you actually want to know, or what you're actually asking, is what pronouns someone uses. I can't really think of another reason why you would need to know if someone is trans or why you would be wondering if someone is trans. And so my response to this is just stop. So what should you avoid? So we don't call people a transgender or a tranny. Don't say tranny, transvestite, hermaphrodite. These are all words that we don't use anymore. Some trans people do identify as men and women, but not all trans people identify as men and women. I think this is a point that I sort of like differ from some other presentations that you might see. Not all trans people identify as men and women. I myself identify as a trans man with that word always attached to that identity. Gender nonconforming people are not unsure of their identities. I've heard this a lot recently. Don't ask people about how trans they are or where they are in their transition. This is all super personal, should not probably be asked outside of work either, but certainly not at work. And then, don't assume you know people's genders. So remember that you interact with trans people every day. You've probably interacted with a trans person today. And again, stop saying biological when we're talking about identity. I really want to bring it back. Gender is a construct and has really little to do with science. There's not much that this has to do with science. This is mostly identity politics. So do older adults transition too? Yes. Yes, they do. Very young people transition, very much older people transition. People transition at all ages. And even if you've known someone for a long time, they might transition. They might not have shared that with you. So yes, absolutely. How do I get used to saying they and them? Practice. I think you just need to practice. I use they, them for most people who aren't in a room. You might notice that I do this, but when people aren't in a space, unless like there's a real reason that I am using binary pronouns, I really just try to use they, them. It's practice for me. And I like it. I like people to be present. And then, they're there and they're themselves. So why didn't they tell me they were trans? I don't know. Let it go. Let it go. It's okay. Doesn't matter. What is appropriate to ask at work? If you wouldn't want someone to ask you, don't ask it at work. It's just like rule to live by. So what do you do if you misgender someone, mispronoun someone? Don't make the person feel badly. This happens a lot where people will mispronoun me and then it's like, I feel like I end up having to sort of soothe them, but I've already been embarrassed. So correct yourself, move on, apologize, maybe apologize later, but keep it cute. Like, let's just keep moving and just try to do better next time, right? Like, pay it forward. If you see someone misgendering someone, correct them. Little simple things. And how do I learn more if I can't ask? You can ask me. I'm happy to be a resource, and I can also offer lots of reading suggestions and movies that aren't about trans people dying and other things, although there aren't very many like wonderful movies about trans people. Okay, so we're going to talk about simple things your organization can do to be more trans inclusive. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I realize I just went through a lot of information. So before we do that, I just want to read the room, see all of your lovely faces. Hello. How's everyone feeling? Okay. Questions, thoughts. Questions, thoughts, no questions, thoughts. Okay.
Oh, thought. I love your presentation. I think it's really perfect. It has everything and it's just enough. It's I thank you. It's really good. And I'm really glad you're doing it.
Thank you. I hope that it's like the start of conversations. There's a lot that I really appreciate you saying that. And thank you everybody for all of the sweet comments in the chat. I have a lot of ideas, and I think there's other folks on the call that have ideas too. And I wanted to also invite a colleague who I just met very recently, Zan, to introduce themselves. And if you want to share anything, Zan, about your experience, or just take a couple of minutes to share.
Yeah. Hi. I've been with Awesome Pets Alive since 2013 in some capacity, volunteer, adoption processor. I now work on the dog behavior team. So just quick background there. I have been out since pretty much since I've known I was non-binary, which was not a thing when I first started volunteering. Then I went off to, I left the country for like 9 months and then figured all that out. And APA has been really, I mean, by and large, had really good support network at APA, and I'm very fortunate because I know that's not the experience of many, many, many trans people, certainly not in this country. And it definitely, it hasn't been all smooth. There's been a learning curve. As to my knowledge, certainly on the dog side of things, there was only one other known trans and actually non-binary person. They don't work there anymore. But and so as far as I know, most of these people, I'm like the first or second non-binary person they've worked with. So it's been a journey. And I have to say though, having like the coworker and team support has really made all the difference. There's the kind of the hiccups I found with policies. I just want to say like progress has been made, and I'm super appreciative of Dr. Jefferson and everybody who has, when given the feedback, gone and fixed it. Because that's what happens. If we don't give feedback, it doesn't get fixed. And I'm fortunate that APA takes that feedback and then makes those changes. But really though, having the behavior team has been huge. One of my, and just kind of just some examples of where it's been huge, it's because policy is a huge part, but on the ground, face to face is also incredibly important, and in some ways more important to help somebody feel safe. One of my former managers, she's actually now in Dallas, Marion, for anybody who knew or knows her, she was probably like the best about the pronoun situation, both with talking to me, but also correcting other people, because I have a lot of social anxiety. And so I'm very bad at confronting people, like if I'm looking at them. And so I just have a lot of anxiety about that. It took me a long time to feel safe enough to do it myself. Marion, though, was great off the bat. Every time she was in a conversation, certainly when I was there, and I'm sure she did it when I wasn't there, she didn't make a fuss. She just corrected the person. And that was like, that's all she did, was just correct the person. And it was just really one of those things where one of the first people outside my family to do that. And it made me feel safe. It made me know that, like, even if there were issues with the organization, like, all right, I know at least my manager has my back.
Thanks, San. Like, that's super helpful. And I think it's relevant, right? Like, and it's good to model that. I had a boss previously, Dr. Sagerson, who would model that too, and sometimes would stay after so as not to embarrass me, right? Because if there had been someone that sort of had done that like a couple different times, would just stay after and just take it on for me so that I didn't have to be correcting someone. And that was such a gift. Like, it meant the world to me. And it's things like that. Like, I think about you being at APA for so long. I think about those of us who have worked in animal welfare and really want to be in animal welfare for a long time. I mean, this is my life's work. Like, I'm hoping that I can do this forever, right? Some of us have more resiliency than others. And if we're not creating inclusivity, we might lose folks who this is their life's work too. And so I think that when we're talking about inclusivity, that for me is a huge reason why this is related to animal welfare, especially when we think about high turnover and we think about succession planning and all of these conversations that we're talking about all the time. In order for us to keep really good people and people that care about this work, we need to protect our people. We have some really good questions in the chat. So okay. The first one is a great question. Thoughts on incorporating other actionable items? Oh wait, there was one before this that I saw. Oh yes, okay. What's the best way to support someone who isn't sure what pronouns they most identify with and are uncomfortable with conversations when people share their pronouns come up? So this is a really great question, because I think that it used to be best practice to like go around the room and everybody say their pronouns, and that has sort of gone away. And this is exactly why, because there are some people that are still thinking through this. There are some people that pronouns are never really gonna feel good for. And especially when they're said by other people, right? Like so I think that it depends like what place and space. I think at work, absolutely just making it optional. If people want to share their pronouns, they can share their pronouns. If you're not sure what people's pronouns are, which I think is the next question, use people's names. It might become repetitive, but I think that's okay. I think that language around this stuff is going to start shifting. I think it's going to become less awkward to say they, them about people. It just is. It already is happening. And I think it's going to become less awkward to use some people's names and not pronouns at all. And it might be repetitive. I know someone who does this. Their name's Jen. And see, I just did it. It's hard. We have to practice. So, you know, Jen wants to be called Jen, not pronouns. It's challenging, but how much am I really talking about this person when they're not there? Not that often anyway. So I don't know. I think we just practice, we start normalizing this stuff, and it's going to get easier. I think our pronouns are starting to sort of like shift, and I imagine that this next generation, a lot more folks are going to be using they, them than my generation. Okay. Is it okay to ask someone what their pronouns are? Yeah. So yes. I've heard a lot of people say preferred pronouns, and I know this is something that we used to say a lot, and so it became normalized to say preferred pronouns, but now we just drop preferred. And I think it's like really polite when you do this to share your pronouns first. So if I were asking somebody their pronouns, I would say, my pronouns are he, him, they, them. What are your pronouns? I think it's nice to like, also, if you're in a space, ask everybody, even if like you think that someone might not know you're talking about. I think it's just nice to kind of get it out. Okay.
Can I just add something onto that?
Of course.
So what Rory said, and kind of just one thing to keep in mind when you talk about asking people's pronouns, is if you're going to do that, or their pronouns, or really what pronouns they use, because some people may not want to use their pronouns in certain environments, if it's not safe or any number of reasons. But when you ask about somebody, whether you're asking what their pronouns are or what pronouns they use, be mindful that get in the habit of doing that with everybody if you're going to ask one person, because there's a lot that for a lot of trans people, and there's no monolith, but for a lot of trans people, if they're like the only ones getting their pronouns asked, that can make a lot of people very self-conscious and very anxious, because they've just been, called out as trans, essentially, inadvertently, whether, especially if they're not out. And so just kind of keeping that in mind when you start talking about asking people's pronouns, which is a good practice to get into.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to just normalizing this, like just normalize it. It's normal. Okay. How do you walk the line between supporting your friend coworker through transition and not being nosy or making a spectacle of their journey? I feel like sometimes we're putting them on the spot awkwardly or walking on politically correct eggshells, guessing what they need from us. I would say ask them. And be really honest and just say what you said in the chat. I think being vulnerable with folks is like the nicest thing that you can do when you have a question. And be really honest that you don't know and what you don't know, and tell them that you really want to support them and you're trying to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't feel nosy. I think that's great, you know? All right. Okay, so I have some ideas that I wanted to share, and you know, keep the questions coming. But I have some thoughts. So one of the thoughts, and I have some of these in a blog that I wrote, and some of them are a little bit new because I've been thinking through them a little bit more. But one thing that we can all do especially as organizational leaders, is just ensuring that medical benefits are inclusive for trans employees. 55% of trans people report that their insurance denies them medically necessary transition-related surgery. In California, now this is illegal. And I imagine hopefully that's going to continue happening state by state. But if you're not asking, it might just be the way that insurance is sort of happening. So always good to just like ask things. And then bathrooms are a big thing for trans folks. Like sometimes like we don't even know where to go to the bathroom. It's kind of awful. It's not kind of awful. It's pretty awful. So, you know, at Austin Pets Life, for example, like all the bathrooms are gender neutral, which is awesome. If you can't have all of your bathrooms be gender neutral, have a bathroom be gender neutral, and don't tell people that they should go to that bathroom. Like let people choose what bathroom they go to. But I think gender neutral bathrooms are like everything. There's a really good training if people are interested in that. It's like step by step how to create gender inclusive bathrooms, and I can share that with anybody. It's through the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. It's called Bathroom Training. But they recommend, like, if you're building a new facility, for example, floor to ceiling doors are like the best thing that you can do in just making everyone feel comfortable if you totally get rid of gendered bathrooms. So we talked about using pronouns people want you to use. If you have gender-related dress codes for officers, for anybody in your organization, don't do that. And just stop doing that. And that includes, like, I would look through like handbooks and things, because I think a lot of things just don't get updated from forever ago. So things like, you know, I don't even know what this would look like, but it's possible that they are there. So in public facing information, normalizing using they, them instead of he, her, or her, him, or all of the things. So there's some really good information about that too, if people are interested. Something that has come up for me a lot lately is surveys. And this goes for onboarding too. So I think that in onboarding, like, we could easily ask people what their gender is and what their pronouns are. Again, like understanding that might change for folks as people change. And for surveys, I've gone back and forth. I've talked to some of my like friends who work in different places that are doing this work. And I think that open-ended is the best. What is your gender? Open-ended. Let people fill it in. Same with sexuality, like the check in the boxes, because then we're like, oh, you can check as many boxes as you want, but just let people say what they want to say about themselves. I think it's going to be all right. Like, we can still sort, you know? So, okay. So that's something that I've gone back and forth on. If you really need boxes, I do have some recommendations of like what boxes are the best. If you're like surveying 20,000 people or something, and you want some boxes, I can help with that. Ensuring that personal information, especially this is true in government organizations, I think, like any personal information, just ensuring that it's up to date with what people want rather than legal information, and making that process simple if people want to change. Being a good ally, so guiding others through pronoun usage, like we talked about that a little bit, but I'm going to model this. So say like Charlie comes in, Charlie uses he, him pronouns, and someone says, Charlie went to see if she could adopt a cat, then I would say, oh, Charlie, he really is looking forward to getting a cat. Sure is. He loves cats, right? Like, just turn it around. Easy, easy. Okay. And if you have more questions, let me know. I'm just going to keep talking about ideas that I have until someone has a question. Okay. Including transgender training in DEI training. If you have questions about that, reach out to me. I can point you towards some folks who do this really well. And drop gendered language when you're talking about your staff or the public, like ladies, girls. We gotta stop doing this, like just all together. I say guys a lot when really I mean like humans. I'm trying to work on that. And like also naming when you're trying to work on something, totally awesome thing to do, because then we can like catch each other. I say guys and I'm like saying, I don't want to say that anymore. So then like Bobby can like elbow me if I say it, you know, and be like, Rory, you said you didn't want to say that anymore. So holding each other accountable, like taking the like scariness out of that. I think gender is like such an awesome way to kind of take some scariness out of like just holding each other accountable and just like kind of meeting each other where we're at and getting to know each other's stories. So I try to say like folks, I think y'all, especially in Texas, is like super easy, you know, so glad to be in Texas so I can say y'all now. Yeah, it's the guys thing is a hard one. And then including gender and trans in any kind of like compensation evaluation or anything like that, I think really important. And those should probably be separate because I think there's still rampant sexism also in animal welfare everywhere, as well as sort of like transphobia. So including that is important. And then here's one that I like really would like to talk to some animal welfare people. We gotta stop saying that animals aren't good with men, because that's not what we mean. I think what we mean is animals aren't good with like dudes that are just like walking around being real big and like with their bodies and taking up a lot of space or something energetic. Like, I don't know, but it doesn't feel good to me. And I don't think it feels good to a lot of folks. And I think we're going to be like knocking people out and excluding people using that language. I get what we're trying to say when we're talking about animals aren't good with men, but maybe that like, and I'm curious like how to start having this conversation, because I think maybe we mean like that dog doesn't like baseball hats even. Like, I think there's like very specific things that animals are responding to that have nothing to do with gender or testosterone or estrogen, quite honestly.
Do you mind if I chime in?
Please.
So I'm specifically on the dog behavior follow-up team in the behavior department. So like 99% of my job is talking to adopters and fosters about behavior issues. And of course, obviously many of that is people related. And I get this all the time. I get dogs afraid of men, dogs afraid of women. And my least favorite is this dog needs a alpha man, which I just want to bang my head against the table every time I read that. And it's kind of this weird combination of we have to write down what the person has said. We can't just disregard that because we want to be inclusive, because at the end of the day, we do have to document this a certain way. I tend to nudge for more specifics, like, is it people with larger statures? Is it bulky things that they're wearing or carrying, or hats or glasses, masks, whatever? Is it like certain types of, are they wearing baggy clothes? Like just any variety of details. I'll just give like some handful of examples as far as not anything gender, just objective kind of articles of clothing, objects, whatever. Loud voice, things like that, deep voice. just to kind of try to tease out those finer details. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. And there's just, at the end of the day, I got to go with what I got.
Yeah.
I think though, I recently got an email and it was great. It was like, I've never seen this in an email before. And somebody described that their dog was having reactivity to mask presenting people, which it's like, I've never seen that before. And like, even that's not like super objective because clothes do not indicate gender, but it was interesting because I've never seen somebody refer to it as like mask preventing versus a man. And all I can think is like, you must know somebody who's trans or non-binary.
Yeah, seriously. And I don't buy it because I've met so many of these dogs that are like bad with men and they all love me. So I'm not buying this. Like, I'm really not buying into this. So, and I actually, like, Sheila and I used to talk about wanting to do a study about this and just like seeing, just like knocking it down, because I really wonder how many adopters we've denied because we're saying animals are bad with men. And how many queer people we've like turned off from our organizations. Okay, there was a really good question in the chat, which is another one that I like am super interested in. Last year, we required everyone to submit pronouns that we added to their email signature along with name and title. What are your thoughts on this being required versus optional? And Kristen, who's on the call, knows that this is something that I like go back and forth on. And I think about the reason why is because there were certain points in my life where I was like out in my personal life, but not out at work. Like, I was using different pronouns in my personal life than at work. And that took me a while to kind of get congruent. And that might be true that some people are like living that way for always. So I think that I'm curious, like, when we're having these conversations, like who's included in the conversation to sort of like make this happen. And I think that we need to think about like risk when we're talking about this. And like, if it's all people that are cis people that suddenly have this in their signatures, but like, there's no risk there, right? Like, there's nothing sort of like confusing, or you're not like putting yourself on blast by being like, yep, my pronouns are this. But I think that making it optional always, but also like including this as a conversation organization wide and really asking people like what the norm should be or could be in your organization, rather than just like random people starting to do this. I don't think it's bad if random people start doing this. I think it's great. Like, whatever. It's awesome. I don't think you're harming anybody by doing this, but I do think like I've seen it a couple of times and then I'm like, oh, like we haven't even talked about this yet. You know what I mean? Like I'm not even sure we have like defined transness within our organization or something, or I don't know. There's like, I'm not being super clear because I keep going back and forth on this, because I think that when I think about like my younger self, I don't know what I would have done. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how I would have responded if suddenly I was being asked to put my pronouns in my signature when I wasn't sure yet. But I don't think that it's bad, except for sometimes it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable when I'm the only trans person in a room and everyone else has their pronouns on on like their Zoom or whatever. But again, I don't think it's bad. I understand it's coming from like a good place. I just, yeah, like I think that there's like some people that it's like maybe they're not like trans identified, but they're also not like she, her feeling super comfortable with that. And Kristen, like, do you want to add anything? Because I know you had some thoughts about this too. Both Kristens.
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about this and considered it in a couple of different organizations. And like, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable using she, her pronouns. I also don't know that I'd feel comfortable using they, them pronouns, because that feels a little bit appropriative. And so I just feel like it should be, I think offering it is great. And I also have had employees who were transitioning, who also felt like uncomfortable and scared and didn't want to list their pronouns before they transitioned, but also weren't ready to list pronouns, other pronouns. And so I don't know that any of this should be mandatory, but encouraged if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, and then, but I recently like saw a signature from one of my coworkers that I didn't realize that they used they, them pronouns sometimes. And that was like awesome to learn that. So, but then I'm like, why did I learn that in a signature? I wish that I would have like, not that they should have shared that with me, but that like, we would have had that conversation at a different time. So I don't know, like, I think, I'm not sure what the right answer is. I think we just need to be like tracking how people are feeling, and never mandatory. I don't think any of this stuff should ever be mandatory. And then, okay, I've had a lot. Yes. Any other questions? Someone else in the chat.
I'd like, if it's okay, I'd like to answer the one about pronouns for the animals.
Oh yeah.
So this is one of those things where it's like, I love that people are kind of thinking about how can we be inclusive? How can we be inclusive? Personally, I think when it comes to animals, it's overthinking it, not in a bad way, it's just overthinking it. And unlike a animal's behavior with people, where it's like, is it really about your gender, or is it about because you're big, you know, and loud? With animals interacting with each other, even altered animals, sex can very much play a role. And again, I speak from the dog behavior side of things personally, but for us, we do see trends of a dog doing better with males or females. Also, when making notes, it can be very, you know, obviously there's a whole, like when you're talking about people, they, them as singular versus plural, and that's a whole other conversation. But when it comes to animal notes, like personally, I don't think there's a problem, because as Rory said, gender is very much a social construct. Animals don't have that social construct. And it's going to be, you know, documentation is going to be much clearer if you're using she and he. And the other thing to keep in mind is that we're trying to get these animals into homes, and as ridiculous as it can be sometimes, knowing whether the animal is male or female is going to make them more appealing to a certain person. And so it doesn't bother me that we're giving the animals pronouns. They're animals, they have sex, not gender. We're not misgendering them if we call them the wrong pronoun. We just call them use the wrong pronoun. So yeah, that's
that being said, I did just see that Judith Butler, who wrote, who's like a queer theorist, they, them's all of their animals so that people can practice, and just like, and it just like breaks stuff down. So I don't really, like, I think it's kind of cool and cute. And I actually don't know, like, I'm very curious if we're actually making up stuff about animals not liking like male or female dogs and cats too. Like, I would love to see research about this, because I just, again, like, I don't buy it. Like, I don't think animals are making the same distinctions. And I really also don't believe that there's just like two sexes with even animals, right? So like, I'm really curious about that. And then if you're like desexing animals, then what's the marker? I don't know. I'm just like, I'm curious about it. And it's in no way to like disregard what your opinion too, Zan. Like, I really appreciate you saying that, but I'm not sure that I like totally agree. I think that they, theming animals is like totally awesome. And I remember like, one of the reasons that I think it could be cool is because when I worked at a dog daycare, people would constantly be making these sort of like weird comments about how like, oh, I didn't know that was a dude dog. I thought it was a girl. It looks like a girl. And then I would be like at 6:30 in the morning, like, oh my God, I'm gonna die, you know? So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think that it's totally fine. And again, like anthropomorphizing animals, I think we actually should probably anthropomorphize animals more if it means that we're gonna like treat them better. So I don't know. But that's a whole other conversation for a different day that I'm sure people would totally disagree with me on. But I just wonder if anthropomorphization of the like anti that is like just a way to kill more animals, but that's just a totally other sidebar. Okay. So Yeah. All right. Any other questions, comments? What should we do next? Because something that Zan and I are thinking about doing is creating a Facebook group for trans and non-binary animal welfare folks. And then doing some kind of like meetups too. And then we could do like one with like meetups for trans allies too, if folks like want to come to that, or if you have a spouse that's trans or non-binary. So we'll send some info about that. And I see someone has their hand up. Yes.
So in our, like in some of our documents that we have, like our employee handbook, there's a lot of, if he or she feels uncomfortable, blah, blah, blah. We should be looking at that kind of stuff too as well, right? I'm not trying to be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a really, really good question. Absolutely. I would get rid of all of that kind of gendered language. Yeah.
And change it to they.
Yeah. And it reads better, personally think, too.
Are there other, I'm in the marketing communications, and so I'm curious if anybody else is, what kind of documents are you revisiting? What kind of public facing materials are you revisiting having this lens? Maybe there are.
That's a great question. Is there anyone from APA? Sarah Colica, are you on the call? Do you want to talk about that at all?
I can speak to what Seattle Humane has done.
Awesome.
That we've revisited like our surrender questionnaires so that folks can add their pronouns there if they want to, but it's not mandatory. Same with, I believe, our volunteer forms and adoption forms. But as far as employee handbook, I don't know that we've gotten that far yet.
All right. Another thing I wanted to mention, I'm doing a roundtable at HSUS on this topic as well, where we can like brainstorm some more ideas, or if you start kind of digging through stuff and trying to make some of these changes, then you can come to that roundtable and we can kind of talk through some of the challenges and things like that. I think that like in the Facebook group and in some of these groups that, or like in some of this that we're going to start to try to do, like we'll also come up with like some ideas. Like there's a great, I put a radical style guide in the chat, but it might be really awesome to build something like that super simple for animal welfare, right? Like as some trans and gender nonconforming folks. So, you know, I think that this is like an opening to this conversation, and I just like so appreciate you all coming, being vulnerable with me today. I appreciate you, Zan, so much for reaching out and for meeting you, and just really excited to have more conversations like this. I think that as we start kind of like taking the, I don't know, just like making this easier to talk about. And like I said, always happy to be a resource and answer questions if you have them. I will not be offended by any kind of question as long as it's not about like my body or something, but about like work, things like that. Always happy to answer questions and try to just keep this conversation moving forward. So thank you so much for being here. And who's next week, Kelly?
Next week, we're doing the volunteer series.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Thanks, Rory. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is how to incorporate volunteers into these national calls and all of the great work we're doing, and get some of the successful volunteer programs on everyone's radar. And so I've been working with the team at AMPA to create a series of 1-hour calls. They'll be much like this summit, where there are some presentation and some Q&A on a variety of topics. We've got shelters from Oregon, California, Arizona, Texas, Missouri, and Georgia. We have a really cool program from Georgia that is going to talk about some safety net fostering, but it's a variety of topics, and the events should be put up on the AMPA website or the AMPA Facebook page shortly. Casey was working on that today, so I'm really excited about it. They're spread out throughout the week, different days and times, so they may not all be available. You may not be available at the times that they are, but everything will be available to watch for sure.
Yay, awesome. Thank you again, Zan, for being here. And thanks everybody for being here today. And I look forward to talking to you all soon and seeing you all next week.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye.